Instacart shoppers know groceries. They know that you can't make guacamole with rock-hard avocados. They know how to quickly find those peanut butter pretzels you can never find. And they keep you in the know by giving you updates about your order along the way. Let Instacart shoppers help take shopping off your plate so you can get time and energy back for what really matters. Visit instacart.com or download the app to get free delivery on your first 3 orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Minimum order $10. Additional terms apply. Instacart. Add life to cart.
Rob Garcia is my guest. Are you familiar with ghosts? Have you lived in a haunted house? Do you know people who've lived in haunted houses, or have you ever gone on a ghost hunt, ghost watch, anything like that? Most people can say yes to one of the above, all right? Rob has been part of the Kansas City area ghost hunting, ghost hunting arena for maybe 15, I think you were saying 15 years or so, and with Elite Paranormal. And I met him a while back. We won't put any date to it. Doing the paranormal stuff. But he has a new project that I wanted to find out more about, and especially with coronavirus and people having to be stuck at home, and some people are finding they're stuck at home with not just themselves, but with a little extra curricular activity. This is a good time to talk about that and revisit that because it gets us away from politics. Thank you. Anyway, Rob, thank you. I'm glad you're available and the kids aren't tying you down somewhere in a room.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.
With your background of paranormal stuff, we got reconnected recently because there's a guy doing a documentary on Sigma Nu in Lawrence. So it was interesting because you also have a new project, or a recent project, working on restoring Garnett House Hotel. Is it Garnett?
Yeah, it's in Garnett, Kansas. We call it the 1858 Garnett House Hotel, but really in the history of the town, it was really only known as the Garnett House. We just try to give it a date and give it kind of what its purpose was, because a lot of folks don't know. I mean, it's one of those little hidden historical gems that's out there that, only has recently kind of come to light that we discovered.
I was looking on the website. What's Harry Houdini got to do with this?
The hotel ran as a hotel pretty much through the mid to the latter part of the 19th century. So it ended its run as a hotel around right about the beginning of the 20th century. So Harry Houdini and his wife, they used to travel around and do a spiritualist show before he was a famous escape artist. And back then, there was no other place to really stay in Garnett, Kansas. And the Garnett Opera House was one of the locations where they would stop off and do their show with his wife, Beth. And the only place to stay was the Garnett House. And it's said that they stayed there right at its tail end run as a hotel.
Oh, that's excellent. So that's a wonderful little piece of history.
That's really not documented out there, but it's been kind of locally told to me by many folks that, have that word of mouth history. So, because it makes sense, because there was no brick, and right about then they had a brick hotel built in the town, and, the Garnett House died off as a hotel during that late 1890s period. So, right there at the end of that run, that's kind of when they were there.
Wow. The paranormal background, that part of it was, a very big factor when we were involved with the investigation of the Sigma Nu house in Lawrence, and you do EVPs. So with the project that you're working on with the Garnett House, have you already had a lot of indications that there is more activity there than just the physical kind?
Yeah. I mean, after doing paranormal investigations for near 20 years and so many, you got to get that sense as you do these over a time, like when things are going down and when things are happening. So, when we first purchased the place, and that was 3 years ago, my partner and I, we noticed right away that, there was something about the place, because we went and visited with the realtor, and she was just talking away while we were kind of looking around, and the place is 162 years old, so it's in rough shape on some level. But so we were looking around, and all of a sudden the back door flies open, and you hear this little girl's voice, and the wind gust blows this through the room. And me and my partner, who have both been involved in paranormal a long time, both look at each other. But the realtor doesn't realize, because she's not exposed to these sort of things, that what we just experienced. But we're kind of like, whoa, that's amazing. That was crazy, because we clearly heard the little girl's voice, and then we shut the door and we just kind of continue on touring with the realtor. But after that, after we began to clear the building out, because the building was a doctor's office for 60 years of the 20th century. So, and it was filled still with a lot of the materials from that time. So we spent probably almost 3 months of clearing the building. And during that time, we noticed, all kinds of things happening, movement, things walking upstairs, walking down the stairs, talking upstairs, and there'd be nobody there but us. So we started leaving voice-activated recorders. We had so much work to do that we tried not to investigate because, as investigators, you automatically want to jump to that because that's just, what you do. So, so we were just getting voice-activated recorders and leaving them overnight and coming back and collecting them. And we were capturing all kinds of crazy talking and sounds of something like tearing the room to pieces while we were gone. The sounds of it would be weird stuff like intermixed with glass and water splashing and chain sounds and, mumbling and talking and all kinds of stuff like that. And then, but nothing's moved, it's all just there. So sounds of talking, screaming, all kinds of different things we were capturing during those voice-activated recordings. My partner liked to put ping pong balls to see, okay, well, we're hearing all this movement. Let's put these ping pong balls and see if, they go moving while we're gone. Just trigger object type things that you kind of do when you're investigating. We come back and you hear the sounds of ping pong balls bouncing on the recorder down the bottom of the stairs, then back up the top of the stairs and somewhere else off in the distance and back near the recorder, yet ping pong balls aren't moved. So just little okay, it's like they know okay, we know what you're doing and we're gonna tease you. So things like that. But there's a lot of activity there. It's as an investigator for so many years, it's probably one of the more active places I've ever been. And I'm not saying that just because I'm involved with that place. It's just really amazing. I've never, I don't know if they come out for me but a lot of other people have experienced it now. Since, we've started letting folks come in and investigate once in a while. So
okay, so that's my next question.
Pretty amazing.
Was this the intention when you bought the property? Was that what you were hoping for?
Really, for me, no, because I've been involved with so many historic landmarks over the years, doing their history stuff as well as their paranormal stuff. But I come from a history background, so for me, I was really more intrigued about the history of the location and saving the place, because I think if we hadn't jumped on it, it was probably going to get the wrecking ball. The place was, it's a little bit, run down, hadn't probably been taken care of for a long time, and it was very old for a board and batten structure. Going in, we were actually going to we looked at a school out in rural Kansas that we were interested in. Then my partner just kind of had had an epiphany, you know what, I'm going to go out and look around one more time. And he did. This place suddenly appeared as being for sale. And, me being someone who has a history education as well, not just science, just computer science, but, I was immediately drawn to the history once I saw kind of the famous people that had come through there and stayed there when this place was a hotel. Because, when you looked at the place, you're like, well, it's pretty rough. Is it savable for one? And, is it a project, that you want to take on? So, I think it was one of those deals where I'll never probably see something like this not already restored or,
right.
In Kansas City, you definitely wouldn't. So it was kind of one of those leap of faith type things that, the place just drew me with its history. And I think the paranormal part kind of came along with it.
Again, my guest is Rob Garcia, and he's part of Elite Paranormal of Kansas City. We'll talk a little bit more about whether you're hoping to bring some more ghost investigators on site and what that involves. 1858 Garnett House Hotel. It's 1858hotel.com. It's Wendy's Coffee House.
Garnett, an interesting little town because, really back in the 19th century, it was really a Wild West town like Abilene or Dodge City or Tombstone or any of those kind of places. After reading the history, I didn't know that either. You go there now, it's it's real quaint and quiet, but yeah, back in the day, that used to be a really turbulent place.
Wendy's Coffee House, KCMO Talk Radio. My guest is Rob Garcia. We're talking ghosts and hauntings and history, Kansas history. This is Garnett, Kansas. We'll talk about more than that. But with the 1858 Garnett House Hotel, Harry Houdini slept here. You'll have to have that room with the little, you don't know exactly where he slept, but somewhere nearby. And we don't know if he's still asleep. He might be awake now and walking the halls, but you can always hope. The fact that there's such incredible local folklore about that, I think, is fascinating. There's also, if you're not familiar, the Prairie Spirit Trail goes through Garnett. If you want to do that, KansasOutdoors.com or Prairie Spirit Trail, you can find out more about it. If you're interested in doing a bike trail, social distancing right now, this is one of the things that you have an opportunity to kind of go out and explore places that don't have a lot of crowds, and this would be one really neat little trail to go bike across. And I thought I would throw that in there because I think that Garnett is supposed to be right in the middle of that trail. And so they could stop and maybe, at least check it out from the outside, see if they're interested in tuning back in later. But you're in I think in a unique situation where even though you didn't count on it, you got that welcoming with a little girl and the door blowing open. And it says, hey, this is a place you want. I think part of it was drawing you. Did you have that feeling too of like a slam dunk?
Yeah, I mean, once, as someone who studied, the Civil War in Missouri and Kansas and as a major focal point in my education, for me, once, I saw that Wild West history, and not just the Wild West, but tied back to the Civil War in the area and Bleeding Kansas that the place has, the little girl kind of blowing the door open and giving us a hello, I think that was just like, wow, this is amazing. I mean, it definitely, if that was the reason to draw us in, I think whoever knew exactly what to do. So that was a nice little surprise.
The other thing too, we were talking a little bit off mic, and you were talking about this place being super active. I think the fact that Harry Houdini was drawn there is a clue that back in the day, this town had a lot going for it.
Yeah, I mean, the hotel itself had a lot of famous people come through there and stay. All the way in its time in the early Civil War in the 1860s, especially through the Wild West era up into the 1870s and the 1880s. There was kind of a who's who of Wild West figures came through there and stayed. So you had people like Bat Masterson, Wyatt Earp both stayed there. Belle Starr said to have stayed there. Also, it's definitely for sure that. We know those folks stayed there. We definitely know that Wild Bill Hickok stayed there several times, as well as Buffalo Bill Cody. And at one time together, because they came in on the train together to do the Wild West show. So it's also rumored that the James Brothers also did come there as well, because they are tied to the area by their friendship with a gentleman who lived south of town, who was one of their friends from their Confederate guerrilla days. And that gentleman actually had a ranch south of Garnett where Quantrill's Raiders and Blaisdell Anderson's companies were said to go and refit and refurbish during the Civil War. And then after the Civil War, that gentleman, his name was John Rutledge, he survived the war and he came back to his ranch south of Garnett. And that same kind of activity continued with the James gang when they were doing their robberies. It was a place they would go and stay off the grid once in a while, since they knew that guy from their time in the Civil War. So, the Garnett House had a bar in it, so it was said they would come down on the train and then they would be met by a gentleman, and then they would go down, and then they would walk around under assumed names like they always did and frequent all the different places. So it's one of the places to be in Garnett.
Have you had some ghost hunters stay on the site or near the site at this point?
I have had, we have had several teams come in the last couple of years. The main reason why is because that really helps the location get restored. So, we have teams that will come in for a night here and there. Mm-hmm. On our website, you'll see a link for private bookings where folks can come spend the night and experience the location and kind of see if they run into anything that we've captured.
Well, and that you have some videos
that happen.
Videos on your website too.
Right. Now, some of those are captured from investigators, a lot of them are from our security camera system. So we have security cameras inside, and, we do pick up on a lot of things happening, on those security cameras, things like, dolls or balls or stuff like that we've put in there over the time, because we used to live stream this kind of to raise funds early on.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a website that would do that, and they would live stream, hours on end. People would watch these locations. I was watching a static camera,
yes,
waiting for something to happen. But, so we had a lot of, one kind of weird thing happened was that I had brought a beach ball down with that lights up when you kick it or slap it.
Mm-hmm.
And I had bought these for my own children to take to Cancun. So I bought an extra one and took it down to Garnett House. And my partner got sick of kicking it around, so I threw it up in this closet. Now, the weird part about this closet is that building does have a slight lean to it from being so old. So this closet kind of leans away from the edge, so it leans backwards. So this ball up in the closet is actually leaning towards the back of the closet. So what we started to have happen was this ball would launch itself out of this closet and roll across the room. And we've captured that probably 15, 20 times on security camera. But the funny part is the first time it happened, there were some friends there from the Joplin area that were there to do kind of like an online fundraiser for us. And they were streaming themselves investigating. And they had a reporter with them from the Joplin area. Mm-hmm. And she had never been on an investigation before. She was, an anchor. She was an anchor down there. And her first time out, she's standing there and this light up beach ball comes flying out of this closet and goes rolling past them. And then it happened again the same night. Uh-huh. So, that's kind of an interesting thing to have happen. And then it did it quite often for a while. And it'll still happen sporadically, but it seems to happen when people are there more frequently. Okay. So it's like, okay, I know your place, I don't know if their energy is charging the place up or the place is recognizing that there's, folks here when it sits empty a lot of the time because, it's not open during the day yet. So,
yeah, I wonder if there are certain, personalities that attract or energize, that activity, because I've been doing stuff up at Weston. There are certain people who show up there and they're a bit skeptical, and I don't know, desperate, but really wanting it to happen, and yet, it can't happen. And it seems that those are the people who end up walking away going, oh, maybe I didn't want that, because there's that desire of prove it to me, and that thing of, well, I don't believe it, but deep dive inside that there's something about that person that is highly activating for the space, because it's almost like there's something there that they have to have proved, and then it happens, and then they're not really sure that they wanted it proved, which I think is hilarious.
And then you just never know. It's when you go to these locations, and not just the Garnett House, but over the years, all these places, especially during these public type events, when you do those, you never, like we always say, you can't clap your hands and make spirits come out and dance for you.
Right.
But,
right.
It's that unexpected thing that happens. That's always kind of for me, always kind of, I don't know, kind of a present in a way. It's kind of a gift.
Yes.
When that happens.
Yes. And that's the thing. If somebody tells you, oh yeah, it'll happen, it's for sure, it's a done deal. It's like, no, walk away, run, don't, because there's absolutely no guarantee. There's a lot of things that go into these events and creating something that makes people curious and come back again and again. Mm-hmm. And it's that element of surprise. We got to take a quick break again. Wendy's Coffee House, KCMO Talk Radio. My guest is Rob Garcia. He's affiliated with Elite Paranormal of Kansas City. They've been around for a long time, 15 years or so at least. I want to talk about the Sigma Nu House, the documentary coming up in the next break. There was one person on site who told us all sorts of things that he had a difficult time explaining to himself because it didn't mesh with his reality. So we're going to talk about that. Again, my guest, Rob Garcia, and Elite Paranormal, researching ghosts and all that stuff. So stick around. Wendy's Coffee House. Thanks for tuning in. Talking ghosts, talking unexplained, talking things that are curious. Maybe they go bump in the night. I don't think so. I think it's 24/7. That's my experience. There are other factors that play into this, and we don't have all the answers. That's why we're curious and we keep looking. Rob Garcia is also a member of Elite Paranormal. You can do the website for the hotel we're talking about, 1858hotel.com. It's in Garnett, Kansas. Also, as I mentioned earlier, along the Prairie Spirit Bike Trail. So if you're doing a big bike ride, that's one of the places you can actually visit. And during the time that we're trying to self-isolate, you might want to check and see what parts of the trail are open or closed, because that's also an issue. But if you're staying somewhere that's haunted and you don't know that until you have to be locked in for an indefinite amount of time and you realize it's actually your home that's haunted, it can be a big surprise and a bit disconcerting. But with Rob, you can find out you're not alone, that this is not just, a one-off. Things like this happen all over the country, let alone, wherever the planet, wherever you are. I think this is fascinating. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. There's a documentary with the focus being on one of the houses at Lawrence, the KU campus, Sigma Nu House. And there have been a lot of rumors. You have the background on that, though. I was just invited to go along to see what I could pick up on as an intuitive or a psychic. What was the history that they wanted to figure out a little bit more about what was going on with the Sigma Nu House?
Right. So when we went, it was a little bit over a decade ago or so, and we investigated 2 times, 2 separate years. The history was kind of, there was this legend, kind of folklore around the place about there was a girl named Virginia who was hung against her will on the 3rd floor, supposedly by the wife of the one-time governor of Kansas. His name was Walter Stubbs. This was their private residence, not the governor's mansion, but it was a pretty opulent place back in the day. And supposedly this girl, Virginia, was the spirit that these fraternity brothers, because the place is now a fraternity house.
Mm-hmm.
It's a mansion converted into fraternity. So the legend was that this spirit of this Virginia, this woman in white, would be seen roaming the halls of Garnett House. Got on my head.
Yeah.
Sigma Nu, and then they would, these boys would see it, and so there was this legend passed down over many years, and it wasn't a now thing. It was like over decades where these fraternity brothers would see this woman in white once in a while roaming the halls. So our investigation was to kind of come in and go in and say, and also the background investigation of the history. Was there a Virginia, and was there a crime committed where this girl was hung, or did she hang herself? Was there any validity to any of these claims? So that was kind of the work behind the investigation, the 2 investigations that we did. The one year you and I participated in, and then we came back the following year.
Mm-hmm.
So, it was definitely an interesting piece of folklore to try and unravel.
Okay. See, the interesting thing I had that happened to me, at one point I heard singing in one of the rooms. I could hear stuff like that. But the first time we were there, my necklace, we were in the room, the pool, where the pool table was at that time. And that my necklace fell off, just disconnected itself and fell off. I thought, okay, yeah, I know you're here. All right. Well, then when we go to do the presentation where you guys give the the report on what all was happening and what you discovered, what you heard with the EVP, and I think James Presnell was there, and he was doing some other kind of audio type research. Mm-hmm. And the same thing happened. Again, the necklace fell off. And I thought, aha. And it didn't dawn on me till later when you're talking about a potential hanging. That there might be a fascination with necklaces and objects that, go around your neck. And the other thing, too, is I didn't know anything about it, and I didn't have any research until afterwards when I heard, your stories of what was going on. But my sense was that the whole lot of gossip there, they might not have had the facts, and that might have been convenient to have the person that everybody would have been jealous of, which would have been the wife, that she would be the person who did the deed. But my own sense was that wasn't the way it went down. And what the kind of information that I had said that it was, one of those things of it makes a really good gossip story, but there were a lot more elements that went into that behind the scenes, who would have had a lot more access and motivation than somebody who was a higher up in the community and really didn't need to do anything else to improve her status. So I think the gossip is interesting, but the kinds of activities that go on there have nothing to do with those three characters. It's a lot of other, influence from the many multitudes of individuals who have been on that site, around that site, living in that area. So, there's more to it, especially like where you're at. It's a multidimensional thing. There aren't just the people who've been there. There are others that have traveled through and beyond who have left a signature, a trail, and an energy cord that then creates an opportunity for the people who are there, who also bring their own energy. Like when I go to a place or you go to a place or whatever, if we have attachments, we're bringing them. They're coming with us. So the night that you do a seance or you do some kind of an event, there may be a few other players that wouldn't show up for anybody else. And that's what I think makes this so exciting and so interesting and fascinating and unexplained.
And, in the place, in that folklore, from the history perspective, we did the research. We went in and looked at the census data from those times when they lived in that building. And we could never find a person named Virginia or even a person that lived in that household that matched that age. So does that mean that there maybe was someone living there that wasn't documented? That's possible. So, there was nothing really for us to tie back and say, yes, here's Virginia on paper. She lived here. She was a real person. So you will never, I don't know if we'll ever really know unless there was someone alive that can tell you, yes, I knew Virginia, or, was that even her name? Could it have been something else?
Right.
And she was living here in this property as maybe a servant girl or something along those lines, because these were, well-to-do folks.
Mm-hmm.
So, so we'll probably never know officially, like, was there a Virginia that lived there? But I know, we had a lot of activity, and a lot of it centered around that senior room. I think that was like a subdivided sewing room probably at one time or something along those lines back when it was a private residence. So
okay.
There was lots of EVPs in there and lots of different voices that weren't just one person. Men, women.
There were multitudes, yeah. I was going to say the one I did pick up on that's very solid there is an older woman, and she is dressed in 50s, 40s period clothing where it's a longer, like an apron. She sits on the to me it would have been the second level there behind the fireplace. That there is a room that is her space. She does not see what we see. Basically, we would be shadows to her, but she has a cat, and she's almost on a porch-like balcony where she's there, and she's a regular. She's a consistent pattern in that space. I have no idea who she is. I just know that, in our perception of age, she may be a late 40s, early 50s because she looks older, where I would, attribute that now to maybe 70s. But back then she would have had that age and that range of, but being single, being, a spinster, but not necessarily unhappy about that. To me, she's like a caretaker for that space. And you would feel her because she would tap you on the shoulder and she would be in your space because she's just that kind of gal.
Right. But I think the boys, I'm sure they do see something in there, but, can we attribute that to a documented person? Not at this time.
Yeah.
Not that I believe.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Well, see, that's also something when you go in, you need to dot the I's and cross the T's, and having your background doing the history on it is helpful because then it takes some of the wind out of the sails of people who are perpetuating something that's complete fiction and that is actually derogatory to the people who did live there and who were real. And, kind of, it's unfair to keep casting that shadow when there's no evidence and no proof and just, a happy little story that is convenient. And, in a way, a real, this is a bias against the upper class at that time that kind of is what's being perpetuated by that particular piece of gossip. So, okay, we're going to come back in just a minute. I need to do, again, a quick break. My guest, Rob Garcia, and talking about the history, I think, is important, too, because it gives you a timeline and, some of the ideas that people would have had living and deceased about the afterlife. Wendy's Coffee House. KCMO Talk Radio. My guest is Rob Garcia talking about ghosts. He's with Elite Paranormal of Kansas City. They are paranormal investigators. Plus, he's also a history buff. So what are some of the stories? You've got them on the website, and again, the website, 1858hotel.com.
Right. Well, the place was born out of Bleeding Kansas. So the people that built it were abolitionists from Pennsylvania. So they were involved with John Brown That was the center of the Underground Railroad in the area in the late 1850s, like 1858, 1859 period. And it said that John Brown did hide slaves there and move them on to Canada from there, and that was one of their dropping off points. So you get past that, though, in that period, and then once it's no longer their private residence in the first year, it becomes this hotel. And back in those days, this area was very rough still, was very being settled by pioneers. So one event that you did have was there was a woman named Sarah Potter who came to the territory around 1860. She was a young woman, unmarried. She met a couple named the Aldermans. They introduced her to a young farmer named Leon Phillips, as was the kind of the day. They had a short courtship and a marriage, and then shortly thereafter, about 6 weeks after, Mr. Phillips died. It turns out that Sarah was buying what they call rabbit poison from the druggist. Huh. And rabbit poison is arsenic, the same thing. So Mr. Phillips dies. The sheriff, they only have a sheriff, there's no police in those days, arrests Sarah, arrests the Aldermans, quickly releases the Aldermans because he doesn't have any proof of any conspiracy. Sarah is kept a prisoner at the Garnett House because there's no jail in the territory. So Sarah becomes a prisoner in the Garnett House for about 4 months. She lives upstairs. She can have friends visit. She eats. Back then, when we say hotel, this was more like a big boarding house. So she ate communally with all the other guests downstairs while waiting for her trial, or until a mysterious party comes to town one night and Sarah disappears. Turns out Sarah goes to Cincinnati, marries another gentleman. I don't know if she killed that guy, but for some reason she comes back to Kansas later on, and someone figures out who she is, and they arrest her, and then they have a trial for her in Douglas County, and she has a mistrial and is never convicted of the crime and leaves the territory. That's kind of the last you hear of her. But yes, she was a Black Widow murderess. I'm pretty sure she probably did it. She was a prisoner there at the Garnett House because they were kind of a temporary jail for her.
Lizzie Borden isn't the only one who's famous for axe murders.
Yes, this is a kind of a famous event that happened in 1864 in the Garnett House. Now, at that time frame, this was right at the Battle of Westport / Battle of Mine Creek. For those who don't know, the Civil War was happening right in our doorstep here, and the Confederate Army was racing south trying to get to Arkansas when they were caught from behind at Mine Creek, which is about 40 miles to the east of Garnett. So the problem, though, you have in Garnett is everyone's terrified of Confederate raiders because Quantrill and those folks are known to operate in the area. So they're hiding all their valuables. They're burying everything because most of the young men are gone away in the Civil War. So how this ties back to the Garnett House was in the attic there was a black freedman, an African American. His name was John Warren. He was D.W. Houston, who is the builder of the Garnett House. He was one of his hand servants. Mm-hmm. So he worked for Mr. Houston. I'm not sure if he just did odd jobs around the place. But at the same time this was going on, there was a lecturer who came to town. His name was Dr. Derby. He was a phrenology professor. A phrenology professor, for those who don't know, the study of the shape of your head determines your intellect. Back then, that kind of lecture a lot of people would turn out for. That's like, the movie showing up. So there's a woman down the street. Her name was Mrs. Adeline Duran. She's an original settler of Garnett. She lives there with her 2 grown children. Her son's away. Her daughter goes to the lecture, and mom stays home reading by the fire. So this gentleman, John Warren, also is going to go to this lecture. So he leaves the hotel and makes his way down towards this place they were having the lecture. But on the way there, he passes Mrs. Duran's house, and he sees Mrs. Duran reading by the fire inside the window. So he goes to the wood pile and gets an axe and goes inside and hits Mrs. Duran over the back of the head with the blunt end of the axe, knocking her unconscious. And then it said that he had his way with her and then begins to rob the place. So in the midst of the robbery, Mrs. Duran wakes up, tries to escape, and that's when John hits her with the blade into the axe, nearly severing her head. Mm-hmm. I don't know if he feels remorse or panic about what he's done, but he throws the axe in the wood pile and he runs back towards the Garnett House to the attic where his room is. But along the way, he's seen by an African-American boy named Robert. That's only how he's referred to as Robert. Mm-hmm. So Robert sees John going back. John Warren goes up to his room, goes to sleep. Mrs. Adeline's grown daughter comes back from the lecture, finds Mother, puts out the alarm. All the men that are still in town start racing around trying to figure out who could do the crime. They run into Robert, this boy. And Robert says, well, I saw John Warren coming from there. So they go up to the attic of the Garnett House. They go up in there. They find John, supposed to sleep, and supposed to have bloody clothes. So they pull him out of the Garnett House, take him downtown, where eventually he gives a confession for the crime, and he eventually has a trial. And then he is hung for the crime downtown from the rafters of the unfinished jail downtown. Because they still didn't have a jail yet. It said thousands turned out for this hanging. So it even made the New York Times instead. So John Warren, he hangs for the crime. And in a weird kind of twist, they gave his body to the Negro community for burial, but it said they gave his head away to this Dr. Derby, this phrenology professor, for study.
Oh.
So, that's
weird.
Kind of
Really?
a weird kind of twist to that. But, I ran into folks, descendants, who don't think that John Warren really did the crime. There's always a possibility, even though this was abolitionist territory, there's always a possibility that maybe he was a scapegoat.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a documented event. This is in the history of the area.
Wow.
That this really happened. So, John Warren lived in the attic. He committed an act where he didn't do it on the premises, but, so ultimately he paid for the crime.
Okay.
A little bit of weird history there.
Yeah. So for people who want to go sleep in that place, are you still doing this right now during this time?
Yes. Because we really have small amount of people that come for these events. And, typically people that are well connected with each other. So
part of a group already.
So we practice some protocols when we're handing off the place and giving the history, but they're usually already know each other quite well, most of these folks.
Plus you're already isolated because this isn't an operational hotel. This is a place that's being restored.
Right.
And
it's a historic landmark.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating. And you have an out time and end time. When do you expect to be possibly going?
I think we're taking it year by year. We're trying to knock out a big project yearly. It's kind of the path that we've taken on.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about funding and how much money we can raise for each project. So instead of kind of like a big bang, implementation where I'm totally rehabbing the building one time, it's like this last year and this year, the building's been and some of the woodworking taken care of outside. And then once that happens, then we'll start to move into the interior, and different spots will be addressed and things will be kind of fixed as we go. Now, this place is 162 years, so it's never going to look like the Savoy or the Taj Mahal, but, definitely we're trying to get it back to its Old West style days. It was a doctor's office for 60 years, so there's a lot of kind of clinical effects, kind of clinical leftovers from that period.
Mm-hmm.
Husband and wife doctors practiced in there from the 1950s all the way up to the 21st century. So they left a lot of things behind. Like we still have an X-ray table and a laboratory. So,
wow.
There's an X-ray development closet and things like that. So,
ambiance.
there's a little bit of that era as well. So we're gonna make sure that we pay tribute to them and that era of the hotel, because that's quite a bit of its history. A lot of people in the town still only know the place as the doc's office. So we definitely we try to make sure that we pay tribute to them as well.
Going to have to let you go. Again, this is Rob Garcia, and we're talking about the 1858 Garnett House Hotel. If you're interested in booking a guest stay, then go to the website and check it out. And because pandemic or not, ghosts are with us 24/7, and you might just have an up-close and personal encounter if you're willing to be open to the invitation. I appreciate your time, Rob.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.
And whatever you're doing now, remember, anything's possible. Keep your mind open. If you haven't experienced a ghost, that doesn't mean they're not there. It just means you haven't experienced a ghost. So anything could happen, and you could experience a ghost, especially, it sounds like, if you go to the 1858 Garnett House Hotel. Thanks for listening. Wendy's Coffee House, KCMO Talk Radio.
Ay, mija, abuelita's on her way and I still need to shop for the party.
No worries. Let's order through Instacart.
¿Insta qué?
Sí, llama. We can order groceries and more online and get everything delivered in as fast as an hour.
Everything for dinner? Carne, tortillas, limas, plátanos.
Claro. Anything else?
Just make sure the plátanos are ripe.
Get groceries delivered same day with Instacart so you have more time for family. Visit instacart.com or download the app to get free delivery on your first 3 orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Minimum order $10. Additional terms apply.